Hi, everyone. Mayor, Ambassador, distinguished guests, thank you so much for having me here today. On behalf of Mayor Bill de Blasio, I'm thrilled to be here to discuss how New York City is leading on local action towards the Sustainable Development Goals to tackle global challenges. I hope all of you will leave this conversation inspired by the experience of New York City and feel empowered to take local action on global goals. As the ambassador so well established in his remarks, all of us here know the role of cities is changing. The majority of the world's population now lives in cities, and that portion is only expected to keep growing. Meanwhile, cities large and small are implementing solutions on the front lines of the most challenging global issues and showing how government can work to improve the daily lives of its people. For that reason, it is imperative for local communities and governments, no matter their size or their location in the world, to have a voice on the international stage. In addition, at this time when some federal and national leaders around the world are stepping back from their responsibilities, cities and towns are stepping up to address the challenges that are defining our era. And we are succeeding. Cities have proven their capacity to advocate locally on critical issues like climate change, migration, and gender equity, and to promote citizen engagement, especially with youth empowerment. City and local leadership has also played a very important and timely opportunity to advance the Sustainable Development Goals at the local level. And I believe New York's experience exemplifies the profound global shift we are witnessing towards city diplomacy, and that is the story I want to share with you today. First, let me tell you a little bit about my office, the New York City Mayor's Office for International Affairs. It is over 50 years old. New York City is host to the largest diplomatic corps, and I argue one of the most influential in the world. We have 193 permanent missions, 116 consulates, the United Nations headquarters, and more than 70 trade missions. When I was first appointed as commissioner in 2014, the role of the office was largely operational. We handled the day-to-day tasks of hosting New York City's diplomatic and consular corps. However, given the strong leadership and vision of Mayor de Blasio and myself, the office transformed into something more, a connector of New York City to the world and eventually a leading advocate for cities and the global goals. New York appreciates that our role as host city to the world's largest diplomatic corps uniquely positions us to represent the priorities of cities before the international community. We also acknowledge our large size compared to other cities. From the top of the Bronx to the tip of Brooklyn and everywhere in between, New York City is as large, if not larger, than 141 countries. Our population is 8.6 million, and New Yorkers speak up to 800 languages. Because New York is so diverse, our 5 boroughs face some of the many challenges seen in cities and countries around the world. And that's why it's important for us to create a platform to share best practices, to share what's happening in New York, but also to learn from others. That includes all the mayors from small to medium-sized cities and towns here and elsewhere who are taking bold and innovative actions. We are continually inspired by all of you, in particular our partners in Helsinki and Greater Finland, who are working to integrate the global goals in your daily work. Together, we know we can create real impact. And I'd like to share with you a couple of the examples that New York City is working on. And I'm going to start with our climate initiatives. Let's go back to June 2017. At the beginning of the month, the United States withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. Within 24 hours, recognizing the critical role that cities will play in addressing climate change, Mayor de Blasio took practical action by signing an executive order committing New York City directly to the principles of the Paris Agreement, inspiring hundreds of cities around the country to do the same. We were joined by U.S. cities of all sizes and regions, from Los Angeles, California, to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Birmingham, Alabama, and Kalamazoo, Michigan. A few months later, we also became the first city in the world to publish a policy plan to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Still, New York City has much to learn about climate advocacy from the European Union and our friends here in Finland. We are deeply impressed by the Finnish Covenant of Mayors, which is working to collaboratively reduce the carbon emissions of Finland. Furthermore, your inter-country partnership, as well as collaboration with the greater European community, is something we should all seek to emulate. For our part, New York City is collaborating with partners around the world on innovative sustainability projects. We recently announced the winner of a Climate Action Challenge, which is a Berlin-based company, technology company called Ubitricity. Supported by New York City funding, this company is currently piloting a project in New York City that will turn existing light poles into electric vehicle charging stations. As those of you know, in crowded urban areas like ours, we need more infrastructure that accommodates electric vehicle usage. New York is also leading on what we are calling climate accountability. And with our partner, the City of London, we launched the Global Divestment Network. New York City is committed to divesting from our pension funds $5 billion from the fossil fuel companies and reinvesting that money into clean energy companies. We are also suing the world's most powerful oil companies over their contribution to dangerous global warming, because I think most of you know the impact that Superstorm Sandy had in New York City. These solutions show how mayors and local officials are using their positions to tackle climate challenges with creativity and innovation. Now, New York is at the forefront of also global migration advocacy. While local governments do not decide who comes to our cities, we are responsible for the well-being and inclusion of our new arrivals, from access to education and healthcare to their relationship with law enforcement. Cities have responsibility to our new neighbors and to make sure they have resources to thrive. That's why New York City assembled a coalition of 50 US and global cities to have our voices included during the negotiation of the Global Compact on Migration, which is what the UN community focused on in 2018. This was at the same time that our national government withdrew from this compact. New York City continues to advocate for the implementation of the compact and continues to lead the cities on this. We are grateful to Finland for signing the compact. We also recognize the cities and mayors in this country that have welcomed immigrants and refugees fleeing difficult circumstances. We appreciate the examples of Oulu and Tampere, who both have adopted plans for migration, equality, and integration. Together, our openness is a gesture to affirm the benefits migration brings to our societies, including fostering diversity. Finally, an issue that is especially important to me is New York City's efforts around gender equity. As an immigrant to the US, a survivor of domestic violence, and a gender advocate, it's been extremely unsettling to hear in the last few weeks about the Trump administration's efforts to weaken US support for the Beijing Declaration. New York City actively participates in events around the Commission on the Status of Women annually, and we are committed to standing up for women's rights and the rights of all people regardless of their gender identity or expression. As city leaders, we must walk the walk when it comes to gender equity, and New York City has done that. We have a diversity of leadership, including approximately 52% of New York City's senior leadership positions in government are held by women. And this support for gender equity is directly reflected in our policies and priorities as a city. We have the smallest wage gap in the country, fair parental leave policies, and a strong record of reproductive rights. While New York is making strides to advance gender equity nationally, we still have a long way to go, and we admire the example of Finland, one of the world's leading countries in fostering gender equity across political leadership and labor markets. As New York City's ambassador to the diplomatic community, I'm especially impressed by this fact that the Finnish Foreign Service has almost 50% of its ambassadors are women. Gender equity matters, as women's full participation is critical to the advancement of our global society. And a key issue is how New York City is working towards youth empowerment. It has been so inspiring to watch youth around the world rally in support of stronger climate policies. These young people are demanding that adults in power hear them because they know that their future depends on the decisions that we make here today. We were thrilled to see Greta Thunberg from Sweden, the founder of the Youth Strike for Climate movement, was recently nominated for the Nobel Prize. Her activism in this region, which has ignited a movement around the world, is proof of why young people's voices matter on the global stage. In New York, we are equally committed to elevating the voices of young people, especially as host to the United Nations. We have a program called the New York City Junior Ambassador Program, which is focused on empowering 12 to 14-year-olds, and our ambassador here has very proudly participated in the program, which I've appreciated. And we are focused on the 12 to 14-year-olds in all of our 5 boroughs of New York City to become actively engaged with the global community and the Sustainable Development Goals. The program educates our youth to view themselves as global citizens and, most importantly, to take action on global challenges through the lens of the SDGs, starting in their own neighborhoods. We now have thousands of alumni and have built a community of young people who understand how the SDGs affect their daily lives. This past September, our junior ambassadors joined the Secretary General at the UN for his historic speech on climate action. We all know youth and cities must be part of the solution, and I urge you all to consider how you can bring youth activism around the SDGs into your communities and classrooms. We also encourage you to bring youth to places of power where critical decisions are being made. Now, beyond our issue-based activism, I'd like to speak about New York City's experience in localizing the Sustainable Development Goals, which includes launching the first ever voluntary local review. To achieve the SDGs by 2030, all countries, including the United States, must do its part. New York's sustainability efforts are reflected in One NYC, our city's groundbreaking sustainable development plan. One NYC charts a path toward lifting 800,000 New Yorkers out of poverty, expanding access to nutritious and affordable food, and ensuring those that are on the front lines of climate change, often the most vulnerable New Yorkers, are protected. Recognizing the synergies between One NYC and the global goals, my office established the Global Vision Urban Action Platform, which employs the SDGs to share New York City's innovations in sustainability with cities and countries around the world. Through this program, we invite New York City's diplomatic corps out of the UN in Midtown Manhattan and into our communities, where they see firsthand how New York City is putting our sustainability policies into practice. Talking about complicated issues through a common framework, the SDGs, is a tremendous opportunity. I myself have witnessed representatives from numerous countries coming together through our programming to exchange best practices on challenging topics like gender-based violence and climate change using the lens of the SDGs. This past summer, New York took another historic step, becoming the first city in the world to report directly to the UN on our local progress towards the SDGs. It's modeled after the national government's voluntary national reviews, which, as the ambassador mentioned, during the HLPF, governments are invited to submit their voluntary national reviews. Using the common framework of the SDGs, our award-winning review showcases New York's advancements towards the goals, identifying areas where we can learn from others and addressing remaining challenges. Now I'd like to take a moment to address the mayor of Helsinki. 8 months ago in September, we went on stage together in New York City at the Social Good Summit. There, the mayor announced that Helsinki would join New York City in committing to a voluntary local review. And Mayor, I want to thank you for that partnership and your foresight in recognizing the critical role that cities must play in achieving the global goals. Since then, the VLR process has truly taken off, with cities around the world committed to reporting the progress. And by doing so, they are demonstrably, affirmatively, on a global stage, making a commitment to the SDGs. So by now, you might be thinking, yes, but you represent New York City. Of course you should do things like the VLR. You're host to the UN, and you're huge. But I'm here to tell you that every city, every community can and should connect the work you're doing, the work that you're already doing to empower your citizens to the global goals, because this is how we are collectively going to achieve the SDGs. As local elected officials and thought leaders on this topic, you must use your significant influence to shape the future we want to see. Specifically, we want as many cities as possible, no matter their size or location, to join and participate in the voluntary local review process. With more than half the world's population living in urban areas, our efforts can go a long way towards achieving the 2030 vision. But we must act now because we are on a very clear timeline as to how we have the amount of time we have to make impact. By conducting a VLR, you are taking a seat at the table and affirming that regardless of federal or national leadership changes, cities have a voice. So when you return to your communities, I encourage you to consider how your local efforts are contributing to the global goals. As more cities join us, we will continue to strengthen our own implementation of the SDGs so that we can collectively achieve the 17 goals by the year 2030. I'd like to leave you today with this. Despite New York City's progress, we remain a city with daunting challenges to solve, just like the global community that we reflect. We will therefore continue working with municipalities across the world to learn from and to share the strategies that have succeeded here. No matter what happens at the federal level, New York City will continue engaging in city diplomacy. As our experience with climate, migration, gender advocacy, and youth empowerment has shown, city leadership on global issues is more important than ever. However, cities can't do it alone. Those of us who work together on advancing the SDGs and sharing best practices and experiences are united in a commitment to our global collective future. While as countries and cities may make a difference, our core values of inclusion, fairness, openness, and cooperation unite us. Thank you so much for giving me the time to share our story, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Abeywardena. Sorry, we have a couple of questions from the audience. Thank you very much. We have actually a lot of questions here from the audience.
I hope they're easy.
Yeah, I hope so too. Let's see what we have here. What is the role of citizens in reaching SDGs, or is it only a top-down issue?
Absolutely not. So here's a perfect example through our New York City Junior Ambassador Program. One of the SDGs, 14, is called Life Underwater. This school had decided to focus on SDG 14 because they live in the South Bronx, near the South Bronx River, which is one of our filthiest waterways in New York City. And these kids learned about what SDG 14 meant, not only in the local sense, but also globally and how that worked. But now they are committed to cleaning up the South Bronx River, and that is a direct relationship between what needs to happen with SDG 14, Life Underwater, and how young people and communities act on that.
So it's both.
It is. Yeah. It is primarily, it's both in the sense that national governments need to understand and commit to these issues, but the impact is going to be happening in our communities. It is the way that we deal with climate in our communities, immigration, how companies think about equal pay for women, but these are the ways that this impacts citizens and the way that we can show up.
Yeah, of course. Next question. Are SDGs the best way to govern cities towards the sustainable future?
I think
question.
Yes, it is. So the thing about the Sustainable Development Goals, it's incredibly unique in that 193 countries came together in 2015 and agreed to this set of global goals. And the reason that is relevant to us is that it allows us to have a common framework and language where we can exchange best practices and talk about our challenges beyond borders. That is, the SDG framework is what makes our relationship, New York City's relationship with Helsinki, so effective, is that we have a common language from which we can talk about the issues that are covered within the SDGs.
Talking about a common language, somebody is asking what SDG means. It's sustainable.
It's the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think this is like a marketing thing that we all need to work on. We also use it, we also call it the global goals. The reason that I think the ambassador and I talked about the SDGs in its formal sense here is the importance of getting that established, I think, with this very elite crowd here.
What will be the most difficult thing for New York when transforming into 1.5 degree city?
What is that is a very good question. I would want to punt that to our climate team, but there are thousands of old buildings in New York City that we need to update. So it's not only what we are building, it's the renovations that we need to make. But again, like I mentioned, that New York City climate challenge, one of our biggest is how do we shift to electric vehicle usage and where do we have charging stations? New York City, if you guys have been, is packed. We have no more room for anything. So it is really about how we reuse and repurpose existing infrastructure. And so I think that's going to be one of our significant challenges.
Talk about marketing. What kind of cooperation between US majors and European ones would be most efficient in making sustainability goals known to people? Is it just a marketing issue?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
What kind of cooperation between US majors and European ones?
Well, I think we need to talk to our citizens. So the reason that I talked about the Junior Ambassador Program is at the end of the day, I'm paid by New York City taxpayers, and while the mayor supports the work that my office does, we need New Yorkers to understand what the SDGs, the global goals are, and how it's relevant to their lives. Right there, that is a marketing exercise. And so the more cities in Europe that agree to do a voluntary local review, start to look at their community, their local policies through the lens of the SDGs, and start to talk to their citizens about it. I think that educational process is the marketing that we need to do.
The last question, what is the most important action the cities should do to meet the SDGs?
There's no silver bullet. We are challenged by regional contact, by climate change, by the reality of migration that's happening around the world. I think every city needs to look at what is best for their citizens and engage the SDGs from that perspective. And very selfishly for the mayor and I, what we would like you to do is think about that in the context of the voluntary local review. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the VLR and this ability to submit it to the UN and have this relationship directly with the United Nations gives us a seat at the table, and we should take it.
As you just told us, New York has been taking its own path politically in the United States.
Yes.
What kind of sacrifice does it mean, or if any?
It doesn't feel like a sacrifice to New Yorkers because what we get to do, I mentioned, we have hundreds of different countries represented, over 800 languages. New York City is one of the safest cities in the US. We thrive from an economic standpoint because of our inclusivity and diversity. So with what we're seeing in our federal government, we are quite proud to be able to showcase what a city can look like when we embrace diversity, inclusion, and progressive policies that include climate action.
We are proud of you too. Thank you, Penny Abeywardena.
My pleasure.